Ready to go? Good morning. Boker Tov. It's my great pleasure. My name is David Miron Wapner. I'm the chair of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development based in Jerusalem. We are here gathered, a number of religious leaders, to make a call for action, a spiritual call for action. It would be my pleasure to welcome those who are on the stage with me today. And the first speaker will be James Sternlicht of the Peace Department. He is a friend and a partner in the Sinai Climate Partnership of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, together with the Elijah Interfaith Institute, Gigawatt Global, a company that builds solar power plants in Africa, the Israel Union for Environmental Defense, the United Nations United Nations Environment Program, Faith for the Earth Initiative, and we are all gathered to engage religion and people of faith in the greatest existential crisis that we face in climate change. So without any further ado, I will set the stage that after James makes a brief few introductory remarks, each of the panelists will then have an opportunity to speak for 3 to 5 minutes, and hopefully we will leave time for questions and responses from the audience. I will note that this event is being live streamed on the Facebook page of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. So first, James Sternlicht.
Thank you, David. Is this on? Okay, cool. So good morning. I'm James Sternlicht, CEO and founder of the Peace Department. We came together starting a couple years ago, actually, to look at how we could catalyze the change needed to bring about a better human future on this planet, and principally to focus on how we can respond to the massive ecological challenges we face. And since the Club of Rome report in 1972, there's been a lot of work in this direction. From the hippies tying themselves to trees to massive gatherings like the one here at COP27 today. And unfortunately, despite music videos and the entertainment industry getting involved and governments pushing us in the right direction, we haven't seen the evolution of society that we've really needed to see in order to move things forward. And part of that is we've been speaking heavily from the data perspective. Here's what's happening, here's the data that supports that. And while that is a very intelligent way to do things, data doesn't necessarily resonate with people. In Plato's Republic, the question is asked, what are the stories that we tell our children? How do we explain to people what virtue is, what being good looks like? The religions, over their histories, have provided that framework. When you look at what resonates with people, it's the greatest stories ever told. It's not data sets. So the idea had come to us with the notion that perhaps we should look into these greatest stories that were told. Perhaps we should look into our traditions and look how we can catalyze the 6.5 billion faithful around the world to bring about a better human future and to work together for the betterment of humankind. Because what we need right now is an evolution. It's a metamorphosis. We need to change the way that we engage with each other and the planet if we're going to have that better future. And with that, there's this understanding that the religions, as beautiful they are in their diverse traditions, are not that different in what they teach. And so we saw an opportunity, especially with being here in Sinai, a place that is held holy to the Abrahamic faiths, where Moses came down from the mountaintop with 10 commandments and gave light to the first Abrahamic faith, the Jewish faith, that there's an opportunity to use our location in Sinai and the residents of this place alongside this massive international gathering of, I think, 30,000 people who are here for the COP27, to introduce 10 new commandments or 10 new principles that are not so new in that they've been in the religions all along, but rather they haven't been necessarily the focal point. You know, there's laws and traditions that we followed, and we may have forgotten how important it was to be connected with the earth. We may have forgotten how important it was to look at the rains and the floods and the droughts and the harvest, and to understand that we come from these things and we cannot be separate from them. So with that, you know, we have this massive opportunity now, and I don't want to say it's the last great hope for humanity, but it is one of the last great hopes for humanity, to bring people together under a common cause, with a common mission, and with common understanding towards that better future. And so, you know, with that, some of our partners went up to Sinai yesterday and broke the tablets. With that, they were, you know, mimicking the what Moses did with you know, the green tablet for the climate principles, and with the other tablet for the broken promises. We have to move past where we've been to get to where we're going. There is no other option. So with that, I'll pass it back to David to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, James. It is with really great humility that I am privileged to moderate this panel of religious leaders who will be making a call to action. Last night, together with a few friends, we ascended to the summit of Mount Sinai. It was a magnificent sunrise experience, and I was reminded of the place that we humans occupy in this fabulously beautiful, awesome, created world, and our tremendous responsibility to preserve and to care for and to love all of creation, and particularly to respond to the values and shared principles of our various spiritual traditions, to love and to care for one another and to care for all life. And it is a great call to those of us who believe to participate in meeting this challenge of climate change with renewed sense of hope and spirit. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce Sister Maureen Goodman of Brahma Kumaris.
Thank you so much. And I do feel this is a very, very important moment, because the voice of faith communities is really vital in terms of climate change, in terms of coming to a solution that will really benefit the whole of humanity. And at the beginning of this, of COP, there was something called the Talanoia Dialogue, which brought faiths together. And then a call was made to UNFCCC. And now, last night in London, the Elijah Board of Religious Leaders then presented the 10 principles for climate repentance. And I asked myself, why repentance? It does come into all of our faiths, but it's important that repentance brings with it realization, and realization then brings with it the capacity for action. So it's not only repentance on its own. And I would like to quote something. Former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, was present, and he said that ours is a voice of hope and unity, grounded in a spiritual vision. From this vision, offered as common ground between diverse religions, a positive attitude to life is derived that can inform practical decisions and negotiations. So we're making the connection between our inner life, our faith, our consciousness, our awareness, our values, our intent, and the quality of our actions and the effectiveness of that. Whatever is within is reflected without. And I would like to just share just a couple of the 10 principles. I won't read them all out, there isn't time, but in principle number 4, the distinctive task of humanity is to nurture and serve this interdependent life-giving, and so to resist the temptation to exploitation, waste, and harm. Acting in the interest of human well-being cannot be something pursued in separation from working for the well-being of the whole created order. This finds 2 prominent expressions: commitment not to harm creation and the responsibility to protect it. Commitment to serve, advance, and aid in the growth and evolution of all parts of creation. Therefore, we recognize that we are responsible for the well-being of all life today, as well as for future generations. That is a very strong commitment for all of us. And another point, which I think is very relevant here, there are reactions when we harm the earth and others. Actions have consequences, and no action can be ignored. The weight of our actions and their short and long-term consequences lead us to find ways of mitigating harmful actions and to work for the good. Therefore, act knowing that every action counts. I think this is a very profound call, and 84% of the world's population subscribes to a faith, 94% in Africa. And so the voice of faith communities, the outreach of faith communities, and the wisdom of faith communities is absolutely crucial in mitigating against the climate crisis that we see looming. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Maureen. It's my pleasure to introduce... Last. Perfect. He was going to be next. So it's my pleasure to introduce my dear friend and colleague, the Executive Director of the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, Rabbi Yonatan Neril.
The Nobel laureate Toni Morrison tells a story of a young boy who comes to an elder woman with a bird in his hands. And he says to the woman, "Can you tell me whether the bird in my hands is alive or dead?" And she looks at the boy and she realizes that he's playing a trick on her. Because if she says the bird is dead, he will release his hands and the bird will fly away. And if she says that the bird is alive, he'll close his hands and crush the bird. And either way, she'll be wrong. He's got her coming and going. And so she thinks to herself for a minute, and she says to the young boy, "I don't know whether the bird in your hands is alive or dead. All I know is that the life of the bird is in your hands." The ecological crisis is a spiritual crisis. And here we are amidst tens of thousands of people at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, focusing on the role of religion. The ecological crisis is not just about the birds and the bees, the trees and the toads. It's about how we live as spiritual beings in a physical reality. And it's also a crisis of religion. Because since 1988, nations in the world have been getting together to try to address the climate crisis, which is now the climate emergency, hoping that we can prevent a climate catastrophe, which is already unfolding in many places in the world, including Pakistan, where 33 million people were flooded. And every year, emissions go up. And every year, the number of people from the fossil fuel industry outnumber the number of religious leaders, probably by a factor of 50 to 1. And the question is, when will the sleeping giant of religion wake up to address a sustainable future? When will clergy become vehicles for behavioral change for sustainable behavior? The people on this panel are working tirelessly to empower clergy to teach and preach on climate change and ecological sustainability. I'm so grateful to be here with my colleagues who are doing amazing work. And the question is, what is going to move the needle? We don't need to reach 50% of people living completely sustainable lives, I don't think. We need to reach a smaller percent where they change the operating system of humanity. And what I mean by that is that the current operating system is focused on consumerism, is focused on instant self-gratification, short-term thinking, arrogance, greed. Those spiritual roots need to be replaced by long-term thinking, moderation, finding spiritual satisfaction in God, family, and community. When we make that spiritual shift, when we raise our level of spiritual awareness, then the outer problems will go away. As Henry David Thoreau said, for every 100 people hacking at the branches of the tree of evil, one person's hacking at the roots. Climate change is a symptom of a much bigger problem, as is biodiversity loss, as is acidification of the oceans. The inner issues are the ones that we ultimately need to focus on, because if we think that we're going to solve the climate crisis with just Teslas and solar batteries, so we're not going to have addressed the fundamental, deeper issue of what is driving humanity to ravage the earth. Why do we seek our satisfaction from outside, and how can we find it from within? And so my hope and my prayer is that we will raise our level of spiritual awareness so that the next generation can inherit a thriving, spiritually aware, and sustainable planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Yonatan. As I introduce our next speaker, I wanted to share a quick vignette from yesterday's climb at the mountaintop of Sinai. I looked over and saw a woman raising her arms up as the sun was rising, and I realized that it's a woman who I had met in Paris at the COP in 2015, Professor Catherine Hayhoe. And I looked at her and said, I know you. And I was reminded of the lesson that she taught me at that time. She said, as a evangelical Christian, I find no conflict between the truth that science is telling us and that I as a scientist see in the world that I observe, and my faith as a Christian. And so it is very important to realize that we all have to pay attention to what science is telling us as part of the truth, alongside the truth of the faith that we carry in our lives. So it's a pleasure to introduce Matthias Böhning of the World Evangelical Alliance.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. You said it all. So what's left for me to say from the evangelical perspective?
There's all of us to say, but much more all of us to do.
That's true. No, I'm very happy to be here. Greetings from the World Evangelical Alliance and our Archbishop, Dr. Thomas Paul Schirmacher, our Secretary General. He is unfortunately not able to participate in COP27 due to health issues, but he's conveying his warmest greetings to the panel and to all participants. We are really happy and delighted to see the level of faith engagement here at COP27. This is something we have been working together with partners and with friends over many years, and we saw the level of faith engagement increasing. We saw that we got increasing attention for faith voices, and we think this is correct. This is right so, because we have a lot to bring and a lot to offer. There's deeper messages coming from faiths that need to be a contribution to the climate conversations. This is our deep conviction. So this is why we are here, and I can only applaud the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development and other partners for this initiative that we just heard of. When we talk about a call to action, we can say from the World Evangelical Alliance side, this is first and foremost a call to action for ourselves into our own global community, because we see that there's still a way to go. There are so many issues that need to be tackled. How are we running our churches? How are we living out our faith? How are we living day to day as individuals? Do we really connect our faith to those outside issues that we've just heard about? Or do we have a theological problem? Do we have a teaching problem maybe? So this is first and foremost the first orientation. The second orientation, the second call to action is really a call, I would say, from the faith side to COP, to world leaders, to each and every human being on this world. Because what is our message? And it's part of the preamble of the initiative, Mount Sinai initiative, and I really like that. When we say our message, our call is have hope, don't have despair. We see a lot of anxiety talk in the climate conversations, and this is not a narrative, at least from the World Evangelical Alliance side, that we can subscribe to, because we are people of hope, we are people of faith. Secondly, know that you are dependent. This is also a very important counter-narrative to some of the prevailing narratives where we hear we can all do it. If we just work together, if there's enough political will, we can change the world. Well, we have a slightly differentiated perspective from the faith side, because we know we are dependent on each other. We know that we are dependent on God. Thirdly, have vision. Don't lose yourself in technicalities and day-to-day problems. This is a strong call that we are also giving in the context of COP27. Show love. And what we time and again see is that real meaningful action really comes from within. And this is, I think, where the full power of faith can come into play. We know and we see that there's a lot of inability, incapacity, inaction in the world. Why don't things move faster? And we know that this is an inner problem, not an outside problem. We talked about the data, we talked about the facts. So what is the problem? It lies within us. So real meaningful action can really come from within, and this is where faith have a strong message to give. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias. Last week in Jerusalem at the Foreign Ministry, the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development cooperated with the Israel Foreign Ministry in a multi-faith conference in preparation for the COP, and we issued a Jerusalem Climate Declaration. One of the people who was there was a representative of the Greek Orthodox Church, and it was a great pleasure meeting him here. We are very privileged to have as the last speaker this morning a representative of the Greek Orthodox Church, the Metropolitan Seraphim. So please, without further ado.
Thank you very much. First of all, I am gratitude for this initiative, and the involvement of the United Nations is very important, because it's a message to everybody here that in order to have sustainability, as my brother, I asked him, tell me one word, for the most important word for this meeting here, and he referred to the term sustainability. So this is related to what my sister also emphasized in the beginning when she referred to repentance. And this is related to the Sinai, when Moses received the commandments. We have to remember what happened to this man who even his own people persecuted him when he was fighting for justice to protect the people who were under the slavery, like my brothers in Africa during the colonial rule, when they suffer, like in South Africa, and because he strangled. It was a miracle, first of all, about the way of his survival. Huh? You have to remember that. Can you imagine you to have a dream to have a boy and to know that they are going to kill your boy? And this boy who survived through a miracle, and he strangled, although he has a comfortable life, how to go out to protect the suffering people. But although he was a good man, he realized that there was no place for him to be with the community. He went away. And when he received the message to go to represent, we have to see now, let's move ourselves away from the colors, away from the geographical place you live, from your nation. Let's see the relation, God and humanity, God and creation. Okay? So, in order to lead the people to the freedom, he prepared himself, and we can see this later in the life of the prophets. We can see this later in the story of St. John the Forerunner, who prepared the way of the Lord. And when St. John, he asked the people to be ready, he started his public sermon by reference to metanoia, repentance. And then he asked the people, share your things. And they started sharing. And so we come now to the sustainability sharing. So everything belongs to God. In 2018, I was among the members of the executive of the WCC. We have a meeting in Stockholm. And in our statement to the COP24, we spoke about the role of the WCC in the involvement of the meetings of the COPs. And I'm happy that the head of the delegation, Father Hendrik, is here. And also from Malawi, my brother from the WCC. And also from Norway, the young man. So in 1972, it was the first time, let me remind you some things, where 20 top scientific people on behalf of the United Nations, they have the meeting to speak about the problem we face when, after the Industrial Revolution, we started also destroying the nature, violation not against of the humans, but against of the nature. So now it's 2022. After 50 years, the things are better or worse? My sister, she emphasized by saying that we have to change the way of thinking, the way of life. And in the last General Assembly of WCC in Karlsruhe, the main theme was about our care for the creation. And our acting Secretary General, he emphasized that if we live in this way, our planet is not going to be a place to be able to live. And you mentioned about our care for all the generations. And in the WCC, you know, there is a group of member churches who was in the first line to look after the needs of survivors of suffering people are now around in the globe. And this is the ACT Alliance. Remember what happened in the history of Christianity in the first century when the apostles invited the 7 deacons to take over their responsibility. And of course, when our brothers on behalf of the WCC as ACT Alliance, they were everywhere in the first line, in countries suffering of poverty, in Asia, Latin America, Africa. They realized the pain, and they started also the advocacy for sustainable development to give us the message that everything belongs to God, and our responsibility is to start sharing, and your pain to be my pain. And this is the message of the 10 Commandments. Even if we read carefully the Torahs, there was a very, very care for the strangers. So today, what is threat for some Western societies, the immigrants and the refugees, in the tradition of the Jewish tradition, in the Christian tradition, even in the Muslim, in Quran, in all the religions, there is very care to look after the immigrants and the refugees. That's an opportunity for us, even I think in some texts, to leave some of the crops for these people who they don't have food because they live in this perspective of sharing. So let's take, and then I finish, what happened to the Kyoto Protocol. From 72, when they came to 92, after 40 years, when they came to the year of the implementation, most of the countries who are responsible for the pollution, they stay out. Now, we need three things for the Paris Global Agreement. Number one is the participation of all the parties and all the people. I agree with your points. Number two, implementation. After 50 years, nothing happened. And number three, everybody knows and is speaking about this, but they don't propose how to get the funds. We need funds. Where we spend now the number one spending in the world? You are not going to believe me. Yes, is on guns, killing people. So we have to find ways how to respect the international law, how to respect the territories of all the countries, and then to use all of this as a gift of God to come to sustainability for our survival. And there is the voice of the religion. And in this direction, the WCC encouraged the interfaith dialogue, and it's very easy now for us, since there is the structure, when we invited leaders of all the religions. The one who came there to speak about repentance, I was amazing. He was the Secretary General of the Jewish Federation from the United States. And he reminded us how was the life of the two brothers in the world, of Cain and Abel. How, when somebody is away from God, he failed to protect even his brother. So the people who are not ready to work together and to protect each other, they have the DNA of Cain. We need today the DNA of Abel, to love each other and to protect each other. And the best way to protect your country is when you protect the humanity and when you protect the whole planet. And this is the message of the WCC since the establishment of the United Nations in 1948, 77 years ago. It was the year also of the establishment of the WCCC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Metropolitan. Before I open it up to those of you in the audience who may have things to offer, questions for those of us on the panel, I'm reminded of one of perhaps the last of the 10 spiritual principles enunciated by the religious leaders who gathered in parallel to our climb up to Mount Sinai. They gathered in London under the auspices of the Elijah Interfaith Institute, and that is to treat the world and act with compassion. Compassion for one another, compassion for the earth and our planet, and compassion to all life. Creation was not just for humans, creation was for life. And scientists, as scientists teach us, the earth has an incredible capacity to support life with all sorts of self-sustaining systems, which we are putting in jeopardy. We need to be compassionate to the earth and to one another, and with that kind of action, we will be able to achieve the sustainability that Metropolitan Seraphim was speaking of. So let me ask those of you who are gathered here who may have something to offer. Thank you. Yossi Abramowitz.
Hi, thank you. Jerusalem Post. So what would it take each of your faith communities to label any new drilling or pipelines for fossil fuel a sin. I mean, you have the power of religion, and you want to up your game. So what would it take for each of your faiths to label any new fossil fuel projects a sin against Earth, God, and the future?
That is a good and provocative question. From the World Evangelical Alliance side, we often emphasize that it's a good starting point to label myself a sinner in order to work on my attitudes and on my need for change. I don't know if it's so helpful to label anything outrightly a sin. Religions have not been very good at doing that, and of doing it in a way that really leads to change. So we work with people, we speak to people, we inspire people to be hopeful, to be faithful, to have a vision, to show love, and then we see the needed change coming out of the actions of people.
And well, I am not myself a faith leader in the traditional sense. To speak on furtherance of that point, I think we also have to ask ourselves: it would be a sin to deprive an ambulance of gasoline if that was getting someone to the hospital when they need it. There is an opportunity for a just transition, and that is what we are calling for ultimately. To hand down edicts in a very heavy-handed way, to use religion as a blunt force instrument rather than as a scalpel, to, instead of guiding people forward, punish them for that which they cannot help, would not be compassionate, would not be helpful. Where we ultimately need to reach people is in that place where we have an understanding of where we're going, and with giving them better guidance into how to move forward. Because today there are many people who are dependent on those oil revenues. There are many industries that are dependent on fossil fuels, natural gas. And while we need to move away from those, while we need to shift our focus in our operations, you can't penalize people for changes that they cannot make at this time. This is not to say we shouldn't be moving faster, we 100% should. But there is a balance to this, and it is when we go too aggressively in one direction, when we try to outlaw something from the perspective of, well, this needs to stop right now, without understanding where we're coming from, that we run into problems. And some of the greatest backlash the environmental movement would face, and has faced, is the notion that we don't have enough batteries for electric cars. We don't have enough grid capacity built out right now to handle shifting everything over to full electric and renewables. That's going to take time. And so to condemn others as sinners when we ourselves have not made the change, that would be lacking in compassion, lacking in empathy, and would leave us in a precarious position where it would be very easy for people to walk away from the message. The message needs to be that you're trying, and that we're working on it, and that we will get there, and we'll get there quickly. But it cannot be that we condemn others for that which they cannot help.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, I'd also just like to add that there is a movement among religious institutions to embrace a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. This was endorsed by Cardinal Czerny of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Ecology of the Vatican and many other religious groups. So there is an effort among religious institutions to divest from fossil fuels and to promote a non-proliferation treaty for fossil fuels of saying no new fossil fuel projects. And that's a movement, and that movement is growing, and there are senior religious leaders that are endorsing that.
Please.
Sister Maureen.
Thank you. Anything that harms myself, others, nature is a sin. And the principle of non-violence or non-harming is a principle that can bring a very profound change in the way in which we relate to the earth and to each other. And so, yes, the situation is complex in terms of how we make that just transition, but that understanding needs to awaken the conscience of people. And then it's not that someone else is saying, you're a sinner, this is a sin, or anything like that. And in fact, rather than labeling myself that, I want to say, okay, if my conscience is awakened, I then want to know and understand how to live better, how to live more compassionately. And so when that change comes in the hearts and minds of people, we will then be able to get the profound shift that we really truly need in this world. And it is a very profound shift, a paradigm shift, a consciousness shift that is needed. Thank you.
Metropolitan?
Yes, number one. Our sister in the beginning, she mentioned that we claim more than 80% of the population we are belong to the faith communities. Then number two, the official report of the scientific group refer to negative anthropogenic activities in order to come to this crisis. So we may call these negative ecological activities as ecological sins. So number three, let's go back to Hippocrates. He said, in order to have proper treatment, we need proper diagnosis. And today there is ecological diagnosis that the problem is there because of the negative ecological human activities. So metanoia, repentance, means to blame ourselves for the problem. And of course, the people from religions as a part and even the number one of the problems we face. So what does mean ecological repentance, metanoia? Is to change the way of thinking and the way of life. And then we come also to the point of sustainability, to reduce pollution. But we blame governments, we blame political leaders, and we fail to blame ourselves because we forget that we are the ones who elect the leadership. So we need a preparation before to come here. How to ask our leaders to come here and not to play games. And to bring this message that the best way to protect the planet to our countries when we protect the planet. And the best way to protect my people is when I protect the whole humanity and the generations who are not here. So what is the role of the faith leaders? Is to show our commitment to follow the principles we have in our religious texts. We have this crisis in this world today because we don't follow the teachings of our religions. Because all of us, we care for the creation.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks to each of you for a wonderful presentation. And I want to follow up on what you said, sir. The climate crisis is really a moral crisis. And we cannot put it in any other terms than a moral crisis that goes against the precepts of all the world religions. As you mentioned, over 80% of the population of the earth is religious in one form or another. Our leaders, our negotiators, our politicians are also members of these faith communities. Why are we not holding them accountable for their faith?
Thank you.
So this is a very good question. And there's a great quote by Martin Luther King that says, "Those who love peace must learn to organize as effectively as those who love war." This was the founding principle of the Peace Department. And it's something that we have to look at and say, we're going to take accountability here for holding others accountable. So one of the outcomes that we hope to see from this gathering of faith leaders, not only here, but in London yesterday, bringing together these 10 principles of climate change, talking a bit about a new covenant, working on these things, is we want to see action by people of faith towards holding people accountable. And holding people accountable isn't just social media posts, it's not just op-eds, it's not just bringing people together in common anger. It's leading by example. And so, there's this precept in Judaism, and it's in all religions, that if I see a good deed that I can do, I must do it. Well, a lot of us have shirked our responsibilities. We've decided that, not necessarily the people who are here at COP, but some of us here at COP as well, have decided that, well, the leaders should be responsible for fixing things, the government should be responsible for fixing things, the corporations should be responsible for fixing things. We're going to yell at them, and we're not going to change ourselves. We got to change that. We can't be that hypocritical, and if we're going to make a change, it's going to take all of us. I was speaking at an event a few years ago, and was talking about the opportunity we all have to participate in building this better future. And someone said, well, the billionaires need to fix it. And I said, well, yeah, the billionaires have a lot more power than the rest of us, but would you ask your parents to clean your room? To hold people accountable, let's start by gathering at our churches, at our synagogues, at our mosques, at our temples. Let's get out there. Let's show up, not only to show up for whatever our version of the Sabbath is, but get out there in climate action. I think it's an AA saying, but the notion that faith without works is dead is a valid one here. Because if we don't go out and plant trees, clean the streets, if we don't go out and reduce our single-use plastic waste, if we don't do these things and show them that we're going to show up and that we're passionate about it to do something, are they really going to rely on us one day a year or one day every few years to vote for them? I don't think that's how we get them to change. We show up, we show them a better way, and they have to make them follow us.
Thank you, James. And thank you all very much. I appreciate your participation, appreciate your call for action, and the call for each of us to take responsibility. You have one more comment? I think we're going to have to leave it there. I apologize. Maybe the end. We have to wrap up? Thank you.
And we're holding 3 more events with some of the same and other religious figures at 10:30 today in the Luxor room near the press area. And then tomorrow morning and Wednesday morning, we have flyers. You're all invited. Thank you for coming.